You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Cyberspace, the new frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast First Contact. Its mission? To explore every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. To seek out new viewers and have new conversations. To boldly view what many have viewed before. Welcome to First Contact, the Star Trek The Next Generation introcast, a podcast in which three people talk about Star Trek, two of whom have seen it before and one of them hasn't. It was important to establish that at this point. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we have been watching Peak Performance. It was written by David Kemper and directed by Robert Shearer. It first aired the week of July 10th, 1989. James, what happens in this one?
The Enterprise is ordered to participate in a war game scenario in order to assess the crew's readiness for a Borg attack. The exercise is supervised by famed strategist Sena Kohlrami, who's really good at battleships and beats Riker and then Data. This gives Data a crisis of confidence, because he's usually really good at battleships. Picard then commands the Enterprise, while Riker is given command of the ancient Hathaway, and brings Geordi, Worf and Wesley along for the ride. Who will come out on top? We'll never know, because the Ferengi attack. Yeah, we didn't think they'd bring them back either. How embarrassing. They get defeated though due to things all set up a little bit earlier.
Well, what an exciting setup that sounds, but how was it in the execution? Alex, what did you think of Peak Practice?
Well, I thought it was fabulous. A real drive for ITV in that 1993 slot. Kevin Whately, fabulous as always, and a real star driver for Amanda Burton, who, of course, in everything else has been dire.
Oh, did I say Peak Practice?
Yes, you did. Yes, it was great, wasn't it?
The most frustrating thing was that it actually ended on a cliffhanger, which was never resolved, and strangely for an ITV drama from the 90s, there hasn't been a follow-up comic book, so sort that out, guys. But what did you think of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Peak Performance?
Oh. Yeah, it was alright. I thought it was severely lacking in not containing the character of Maddie Taylor, so fabulously performed by Sarah Jane Potts. But there you go, you can't have everything.
It's very true, and the Peak Practice intro cast will be coming to the Spoilist later in the year. James, do you have any overall thoughts on this episode?
I think this episode is massively lacking in subtlety, for one thing.
I don't want to be negative about it because I didn't dislike it. I kind of feel that as we've reached the end of the series, which we're not quite there yet, but as we're reaching the end, we've sort of plateaued out a bit. Which isn't to say it's not enjoyable, it's just that it doesn't feel like much is happening.
Well, I think behind the scenes, the writing room is pretty much disintegrating.
It's possibly not building up to anything, because nobody's really invested who's working on it anymore. But you do have that overarching theme here. The whole point of this exercise is to prepare for the Borg, so there is some continuity going on.
Yeah, I thought that was a strange thing to suddenly bring up out of nowhere. So many episodes down the line, it's not been mentioned once, and then suddenly, oh yeah, we better get ready for that Borg attack.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're expecting a big Borg attack to come up in the season finale. Everyone knows season finales are huge.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to it immensely, and if it doesn't come, I may have to kill myself.
Imagine, instead of building up to something really huge, imagine if you just did some kind of rubbish clip show where you had two characters standing in front of another character and some really not very significant clips.
God, imagine. I have to go down to the car right now and hook it up to the exhaust. I've got the pipe.
Oh. I think this is actually a really interesting setup. Sure, there aren't huge stakes or anything like that, but it does feel like an original idea. Let's put Riker in a rubbish starship and pit him against Picard. They're supposedly two great strategists. I think that's quite an interesting idea. I'm quite interested to see that, and I quite like the way that the characters interact with each other. Some totally decent stuff. The character, Cerner Kolrami, the master strategist, comes on board ship. What do you think of that character? Sort of an arrogant, brusque man used to rub everyone up the wrong way. We like it when they bring in characters like that, don't we?
It was fine. In some respects, I think I probably would have preferred him without the prosthetics on his face. Just trying to make him look different. I probably would have preferred it if it had just been some sort of crusty old admiral, bizarrely. But it's an awkward episode, really, this one, because the elements are all good. It's just that at the end, it doesn't feel as if anything of any great consequences happened, which is a bizarre state of affairs. But I mean, the individual elements, like the whole idea of bringing him on board, he's testing them, they're trying to outdo him on playing him at battleships. It's all good stuff. It's all enjoyable.
As much as I do like the episode, and I'm being overcritical saying it's lacking in subtlety, even though it massively is, I do dislike the B-plot with Data playing battleships, because it's all built around this idea that he's a computer, therefore he's meant to be infallible. And why? When has this ever been mentioned in the show? I mean, there are many computers that make mistakes. I mean, Deep Blue, which is presumably the inspiration for this plot, made a mistake when it was playing chess, and that's how it won one of the games.
We should point out at this point that they're not actually playing battleships. It's a game in the series, one of these great fictional games. I'm sure somebody's set up an emulator online somewhere. If you want to go and play Stratagema, you see, because this guy's good at strategy, and the writer said, I'll put that in as a placeholder, I'll come back to it. Oh. So, there is this game Stratagema, which they play, and this guy is the ultimate strategist, so always wins. He defeats Riker in about 10 seconds. Was anyone surprised by that? Did anyone think, oh, Riker might beat this guy who we've been told is the best at all the things, especially this thing, which Riker is about to play him at, and Riker isn't really meant to be that brilliant at it?
It's setting up the idea that Riker, and this is part of it being lacking in subtlety, because it's obviously setting up the idea that Riker is playing against Picard against all odds. And it's showing Riker losing in an against all odds situation, so you then think, well, he's definitely going to lose in the against all odds bit later in the episode.
You say it's not subtle, and later on there's some even less subtle stuff going on. But it's competent, it's a setup, and it's a payoff. It's thematically consistent, which you cannot say about many episodes across these first two seasons.
The problem is, I think it's a superb idea with a good script. It could have been much better. As it is, it's just pretty good.
And then Data, his entire arc this episode is that he's found that he is fallible, which, when I was watching it, I thought, no, it's never been established that you are infallible. You are a creation of a man, and you might be superior in many ways, but it doesn't mean that you're the best at every single thing. That is clearly not the case, especially given Data doesn't know basic things, and also apparently sometimes, when it suits the writers, can't use contractions. So he's not the ultimate being. So the fact that he could lose a game doesn't really seem surprising to me. I'm certain he could lose other games. He plays poker with the rest of the crew, and presumably doesn't wipe them out all the time, otherwise he wouldn't be invited to play poker.
I have slight issues with the whole resolution to that plot with the game anyway, about how eventually he wins. Because if you have the whole setup being the idea that why has he lost, and you're sort of putting pressure on that idea of Data should win because he should be able to see out all the strategies, you're already sort of having to overlook the element that you've brought up there. So the way that resolves at the end, I mean, we'll come to it later, but the way that resolves at the end is, well, it's a bit naff.
So Riker is allowed to take 40 people over to the USS Hathaway, an 80-year-old dilapidated ship that isn't really capable of anything, apparently. And who does he choose? He chooses his usual away team. He's got Worf, he's got Geordi, and Wesley. Obviously you take the child because he solves all the problems on the Enterprise and will give you an edge in any situation. It's vital that you take Wesley. He also takes Ensign Nagel, who I think gives some of the worst delivery that has ever appeared on television. It's incredible. It's like they're just having a conversation on the bridge one time and it's like, who is this? Why is this person giving lines? Why are you butting in with your terrible delivery? Who are you? Are you an extra that just got cocky?
Maybe Sonia Gomez was somewhere in the background.
Why is this old ship not working? It's full of hot chocolate. Hilarious. Oh, it's up the walls. It's in the machines.
What do you think of Riker's selection of crew, Alex? Are those the ones you would have chosen, or would you have opted for Troy? Would she have given you the edge, do you think?
In many respects, I almost find it difficult to remember who he took other than Geordi and Wesley, and that's sort of because that's part of the plot.
Oh, you got to remember the bit with Worf where he picks him and he's trying to make that little wooden thing and he breaks it. The best bit in the episode.
Worf, once again, used for comic relief. He's making, I think, a wooden ship, but because the door goes, it snaps in half, and he sweeps it into a drawer. And I like to think if you opened that drawer, there would be about 60 of those ships all snapped at exactly the same point.
It didn't stand out to me. It seemed sort of fairly atypical. Got to split the cast in half, give everyone their screen time, get their paychecks in. And on one hand, yeah, you got rid of Troy as anyone would do, but then you gained a Wesley. So I feel everyone was taking the bullet there.
They go down to engineering and they discover that there's no dilithium crystals, which is terrible. And Wesley's negative, and nobody likes a negative person. They're troublesome in the workplace and they can make everyone else underperform. Riker quite rightly berates him. But then he has to go back and do a school project. Oh, what's going on there? Could he have an experiment which is using antimatter, which is essentially a mini warp drive back in the Enterprise? Of course he is, and that doesn't sound safe at all in any way. Do you think that was a good use of Wesley? Basically, we've established in the past that he has superpowers to do magical things with technology. So it's been established, but it might be kind of lazy.
As dumb as that came across at points, I'd still rather that, I suppose, than an old man trying to proffer his sandwiches on him. Again, high points, low points.
I do like the officer who's escorting him, and he's just a bit arsey with him. Hurry up, Wesley, stop being a dick.
I was convinced that there was some plot element that was coming in there, that guy was some double agent or something, or that, this whole thing was going to be turned out to be engineered for them to tear each other apart, and he was in on it. No, he was just a bit of a dick.
Which is good. It's good that not everybody in the future is just this nicey drone.
But again, it was sort of like, who's this guy? We've run out of people, so we've got Ensign Burke being a bit arsey. It's just fine. It's nice to introduce some new people and realise, hey, there aren't just like 9 people on the entire ship.
If your name was Burke, you'd probably be a bit pissed off as well, to be honest.
I think, essentially, if you have established that with Wesley, you might as well go with it, rather than it just being Geordi who says some words that sound vaguely scientific, and then they do it that way. We can reroute the dilithium through the antimatter chamber and then power it with chips from the replicator, and we'll throw some puppies on and it will all go really, really well. I'll get you 3 seconds of warp. That sounds great, Geordie. Let's do that. Which is the solution to a lot of other things.
I don't know what you mean. Any sort of techno-babble, if it's coming from Geordie, and to be honest, especially if it's coming from Wesley, I'm more willing to let it wash over me than I would be with other characters. I suppose mainly with Wesley, because you look at it and go, yeah, he's a massive nerd, so he probably would know that.
The other great element is Worf's tactics. I mean, they're cheating. They're cheating the whole thing, which is fine. Because Riker only uses conventional tactics 21% of the time, as Data says. That's incredibly specific.
How do you define unconventional tactics? I mean, what is he doing in that 79% of the time that can be deemed unconventional?
Is that in all of life, or is that just in space battles? Is his seduction technique, is it 79% of the time? Is it a bit unconventional?
But it has been established that Kirk, who was a great strategist, he cheated in the Kobayashi Maru.
So basically, Worf hacks into the Enterprise to create a sensor ghost, and he hacks into the screen in order to create a fake ship.
A hologram, they say.
Yeah, well, it's not a hologram. It's all just sensor stuff. Oh, hologram tricks. And this is going to come in very important. But Worf can only do this because he knows the security codes of the Enterprise. And that's how he's able to create this great tactic, this great diversion, while the Hathaway slips in and attacks the Enterprise.
But wasn't this just basically the view screen? I mean, how does that work?
I don't know. You just accept, yeah, he knows the Enterprise computers. Fair enough. I would have believed it if Data had done it, probably.
Because, I mean, you do actually see the ship there in all of its detail. It's not as if he's just gone, well, there's something there.
But I suppose, as an audience, we wouldn't understand that the Enterprise might think that without seeing it on the screen.
If they said, Romulan off the port bow, and then they moved the screen to it and there was nothing there, that could have sold it.
Everyone just leaned a little bit to the left. I did find Picard's whole reaction to everything quite funny, though. The sort of fool me once, one fool me, oh, shit, it's real.
And then out of nowhere, and for reasons, I don't know, to up the tension, to create an actual villain of the piece, the Ferengi appear. Were you surprised to see the Ferengi? I know I was, and I've seen this before.
Well, I'm led to believe that at this point the money was running out. So, no, I'm not surprised in the slightest.
The Ferengi come and attack the Enterprise and manage to cripple it, and Picard doesn't think it's a real ship because he thinks it's another sensor ghost. As if you'd create the Ferengi as a sensor ghost. Surely you'd go for the Klingons, or indeed the Romulans, as they did. It's just, oh, the Ferengi. I don't believe that for a minute. That is highly implausible. They don't understand, because the Ferengi are quite dim, that is a training exercise, and they think there's some value in the other ship. So they want it, and the Enterprise is crippled, and the transporter just happens to be down, so they can't do anything about it.
I tell you what, thank God that thick people isn't a joke that's been mined too far already this series. Oh, that would be awful.
To be fair, they probably are the best villain to use there. I mean, you can't have, like, the Romulans just coming and attacking, because they've been built up as this great threat, and you can't really use them here. And the Klingons are friends, and you don't really just want to stump up a random alien of the week.
Yeah, in that case, you argue the point very well, but they're still rubbish.
I thought it was only the first episode they appeared in, The Last Outpost, where they were absolutely terrible. And a lot of that was down to the direction, which was to tell them to jump up and down for some reason.
I think the problem is that they've mentioned the Borg, and then they give us the Ferengi.
Yeah, that's fair.
They serve their purpose, I think, in the episode, which is to up the tension and to create some actual peril But did it actually need that, this episode? Did it actually need there to be an actual danger? Is it not enough that we just see Riker and Picard having a bit of a Barney?
It's not really an episode that needs a threat, really, is it? It feels thrown in, and, well, because it is. I mean, it should be about a battle of wits. The minute you have to introduce this artificial threat element, I can see where they're coming from. It's worked in other episodes better. The episode with the Klingons and Riker on the Klingon ship, that introduced an element of threat at the end with a similar sort of thing, someone trying to be clever about what they were doing, and that worked, bringing in the peril at the end. It was a different setup, so it worked. Here, it doesn't feel clever. It feels like the cheap option.
You see, I quite liked it. It felt like the natural ending, the natural Star Trek ending, which maybe Next Generation should be moving away from, but I think it may have played it safe, but I don't think it was the wrong ending for the episode. To me, I quite liked it.
And then you have the grey strategist Kolrami insisting that Picard sacrifices the Hathaway and saves everyone in the Enterprise. Over 1,000 on the Enterprise and just a few on the Hathaway. You don't get the sense, though, that he is a great strategist. Why say that when he's sort of like the supervisor in a sitcom that comes in to upset the rest of the cast, and he's a bit pompous and he thinks he knows better, but he doesn't actually know any better? If he had said the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, I might have been on board, but it's quite a light episode, and in some ways he's a comedy character. He's the pompous buffoon. There are some nice comedy elements in this episode. Data going on about Riker and second-guessing him, quite a funny scene. Worf breaking his little ship, quite a funny scene. And this character, supposed to be funny, but not. But you don't ever get the sense he's this great strategist at all.
But he is right. There are 800 family members on board that ship. We haven't brought her up in a while, but, you know, their lives are all at stake here.
Nothing's been brought up. No one's looking after the bloody kids.
The two strands going on. You've got the space battle with the Ferengi. Now, how is this resolved? Could it be that all the stuff that Riker set up in that unconventional way comes into play later on? Well, will they use the warp jump to fake destroying the ship with some photon torpedoes? Some photon torpedoes that have just come back online, Captain. And then, will they use a sensor ghost to scare the Ferengi away? Is that what's going to happen? Yes, you'd better believe that is what's going to happen. Did you think that was really well set up and then paid off, or did it just come across as really cheap and lazy?
The main thing that sticks in my mind about it was the way that, alright, they were scared off a bit as well, but the idea that, hey, you blew that ship up. Yes, we did, and we'd do it again. Oh. Alright, well, I suppose we might as well go home, lads. It's just a sort of very bizarre way of, oh well, never mind. The way they just gave up.
Mr. Worf, you do your sensor trickery. Now, the only reason he could do that in the Enterprise was because he knew the security codes. And they changed them, so he couldn't do it anymore. So how does he do it to the Ferengi?
The Ferengi probably have just like a very simple password, you know, like Latinum or Prophet.
I don't know why you would set up that obstacle, though, in the first place. You can only do this. And then later on, oh no, you can do it anyway. Because it just leads me to ask this question, and that's irritating.
But we know the answer. It's because they didn't think about it in advance. They were coming to the end of the season. No one could be asked anymore. They had no money, and they thought, sod it.
Then there's the other ending after the actual ending, where Data manages to not beat, but tie at Stratagema by playing not to win, but playing to stop his opponent from winning.
Now, I have so many problems with that. So okay, let's get this straight. So the other guy is purely playing to win. And the first time, Data's doing exactly the same. Now, allowing for the fact that that other guy is a master strategist and good at his game, which the start of the episode makes out that Data should be equally as good. If that is the case, and you're going purely by the episode's logic, forgetting any other episodes, then why would it be that the same guy always won because he was playing to win? And why would just playing for a draw... It just doesn't make any sense to me. If this was a game of football, constantly running at the goal without doing anything else, wouldn't work. It doesn't make any sense.
It kind of does make sense if you're using the football analogy, because Data parked the bus.
You can't park a bus in the pitch in the middle of a football match.
We'll talk about sport later, okay? So we weren't satisfied with that ending then?
It's awkward. On one hand, no. On the other hand, what I was saying before about the threat element feels just superimposed onto everything else that's there. That ending feels in line with everything else that went before, if you get what I mean. So I don't mind it. The logic of the game thing sort of lets it down a bit for me, but I don't mind it. And it feels much more like we're getting back on tone at the end of the episode.
Do you feel that the crew are prepared for an attack by the Borg by doing this exercise which has nothing to do with the Borg?
If the Borg choose to stand very still, then I feel that they may be in with a chance.
And they choose to use an 80-year-old ship with no warp drive.
I actually think it's one of the better episodes of the season, certainly in the top half. But, it's quite middling, but it's perfectly decent as episodes go.
I think it's a shame, because, as you say, it's perfectly fine. It's sort of dragged down by association, by the other stuff that's around it, that where we've had a few middling episodes in a row now, you just want something to lift it back up again. And so, where you'd be much more forgiving of a middling episode elsewhere, I don't know, somehow at this point, you feel like you've plateaued. But it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, as you come into the end of the season, you'd like a little bit more, especially in the penultimate episode, really. You want something to just be building up to that final part.
If we compare it to last season, we had the Neutral Zone, which had that plot with people being thawed out from the 20th century, and then you also had the re-emergence of the Romulans. Do you feel it's a big progression from something like that? I mean, that was building up to something quite big in a slightly odd way, and something that hasn't been paid off this season at all, essentially. But is this, at this point, is the show much better than it was at that point?
Overall, it's better, yes. But then the last series had the ongoing plot elements with what was in there in Contagion. I'd like a bit more of that. I mean, you had the return mention of the Borg, I know, but it's not really that much, is it? It's just that idea of building to something bigger, and I don't want it to be instant gratification, because that's really dull in the end. And then what do you do next time round? I mean, it's something that Doctor Who suffered from a bit when it came back. Each Russell T Davies series got more and more extreme in it ramping up its threat at the end of each series, until you had to do it on a smaller scale because there was no other way to go. And I don't want it to do that. I feel that it's a show that has the ability to stretch it out over time, and I hope that's what happens. I mean, you obviously know, I don't. But yeah, it's 3 steps forward, 1 step back. We're still moving forward, but they lost a little something that was a little gem of hope at the end of the first series.
I think they do feel constrained by... They don't have a network, because this aired in first run syndication. But part of the problem with first run syndication is they were basically told that these episodes might not air in this order, and they just had to be self-contained episodes. So certainly up to this point, they felt like they couldn't do continuing stories, and they couldn't... We only get small references, like in this episode where they mention the Borg threat. We never really go too far out of that.
Well, let's see what else we've got left to say. I don't think it's much. in quickfire.
Quickfire.
Michael Westmore recalls, "It wasn't until I started sculpting over the cast of Roy's head that I was able to come up with an idea for his character." Well, that says a lot.
He sort of had such flappy skin on his face, I thought I might as well just go with that.
Worf says that he's wagered heavily in the ship's pool for Riker playing Stratagenem. What do they wager exactly? Because in the future they don't have money.
They're playing strip rules.
The next scene, it's just Worf naked and just a bit angry at Riker.
Armin Shimmerman is playing a Ferengi again. He's done that before, and he will do it once again for a lot longer. That's nice.
Now, I have a problem with this episode. The biggest problem with this episode is when they turn on the power in ships that have been inactive, all of the lights in all of the rooms suddenly turn on. Is there people in all of those rooms who have left the light switch on? Or are they all saying that they want the lights in these rooms?
It's just so they can do a nice shot of the outside of the ship with all the lights turning on, which is exciting.
It's a waste of power. I don't like it.
Well, and on the note about those lights, it's time once again for a return to that blessed tome, The Nitpicker's Guide for Next Generation Trekkers. An always fair and unbiased look at the series that's never really critical beyond the point of being humorous. And they say, when Riker and his crew beam on board the Hathaway, they carry flashlights with them because the lights aren't turned on. It's good to see that First Alert is still in business in the 24th century. Open brackets. The flashlights they are using look identical to the ones made by First Alert. Close brackets.
The original UK VHS release, this was volume 24, catalogue number VHR 2507.
I did have this on VHS, but my VHS wasn't the original. I think it was the last 3 episodes of season 2 on mine.
That was the UK re-release, 3 episode tapes, volume 2.7 and catalogue number VHR 4743, for all you catalogue number fans out there. Well, that was it, and we're almost at the end of the season. Next week we'll be discussing Shades of Grey. Be sure to tune into that one. I'm sure it'll be very entertaining. Goodbye!
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 Would somebody please think of the children?
Those kids are probably dead. They've just been left to fend for themselves in that puppy room. Those are feral dogs now.
They're either feral dogs or feral children. Only one can leave.
Coming this summer to ITV. Who wins? You decide. Ant and Dec host. And we can only hope that the dogs take them with them.